Hey, welcome to Brian for Liberty. Thank you for stopping by. I certainly do appreciate it. And if you are a subscriber, I do apologize. I know it's been a while since I was able to get a video out. Bottom line is, as you can see, I am no longer in a camper. If you watched my last video, we were going through a pretty arduous process of trying to get into our new house. We are in the new house. I am all up and running here. I'm obviously going to continue to experiment with the setting and the lighting and all that stuff, but I am actually going to be able to start recording and putting out content on a regular basis once again. So I appreciate you sticking with me. I appreciate you stopping by and checking out this video. I really wanted to talk about economics. I'm reading The Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell, as you've seen in some of my past videos. But bottom line is the last thing I want to be talking about is racism. I don't want to talk about it. But right now in this country, that is the topic of conversation, and it's ongoing, and it's this constant beating of this drum of racism. And so I want to just share with you a little bit about myself, and then kind of give you my views on where I think this is all coming from and why we're in this incredibly divisive political environment while the nation as a whole is still in relative peace, which is there's this back and forth, the reality of what's going on the streets and the protests, and then the reality of our everyday lives. I think what we're being fed by media outlets, even social media, is very different than the reality of the life that most of us are actually living. So let me start again. Like I said, I'll give you a little bit about me. I grew up in a lower middle class, racially diverse neighborhood. I am adopted. I am half black and half white, and that's only based on the information we have from the adoption agency. So I don't know my biological parents, but I was told that my father was African American and my mother was white. I was adopted by a couple. My father is Portuguese and is actually darker skinned than I am, and then my mother was a Romanian. They were both first generation, like their parents came here from. My grandparents came here from Portugal and from Romania. So when I was 15, my parents ended up divorced, and I moved to a small rural town in Wisconsin. And I think that I have an experience here that's very relatable when I hear what other people of color talk about, is the uncomfortable jokes with their white friends and not being able to say anything because they want to fit in and they don't want to come off as overly sensitive or whatever the case may be. Living in a very small rural town, I can tell you that throughout my entire life, my experience there was I never really experienced what would be considered overt racism. That to me, that's important to me because I never felt like an outsider. The uncomfortable jokes were one thing, but I never felt like these people didn't accept me for who I was. And I think that's very important. I think we paint a picture of rural America as being, that's where the racism comes from, that's Trump country, et cetera, et cetera. But my personal experience living in rural America did not really bring that to my attention. It didn't really have an impact on my life growing up. So, I graduated from high school. I spent 9 years in the Navy. I have lived in Washington, D.C. I have lived in San Diego. I have lived in Florida. Again, I grew up, my hometown is Ohio. I'm now living in South Carolina, we just literally moved into this house just a couple of days ago. So again, like I said, I'm working on the setup. But so I think my experience, my personal experience, actually sheds some light on what's going on. And my wife is an immigrant. She came to this country when she was 17 years old. She's lived in communism and experienced its after effects before coming to the United States. And so I have this perspective of I've traveled the world. I've lived in rural America. I've lived in big city America. My wife is an immigrant. I'm very familiar with our immigration system. So I have some perspective here that I think is valid. It at least gives me a view of the world that's not microscopic. I have a broad view of the world and of our country, having lived all over it. So I think there are three things that are responsible for how we got to the place where we are right now in this country. One is the incredibly divisive two-party political system that we feel like we are forced to live under. A generally uneducated public, specifically in regards to history and basic economics. You can't have a movement, you can't have large groups of people in this country supporting things like socialism if they are relatively educated, if they have an understanding of just history. And when I say educated, I don't mean credentialed. I don't think you have to go to college to figure this stuff out. Folks, read some books is all it takes. Read some books on economics, read some books on history, study countries that lived under centrally controlled economies. Look at what's happening today in places like China and what they're doing to the people of Hong Kong. It's very obvious that centrally controlled political systems, centrally controlled economies don't serve the people well. And it's scary that we have so many people in this country who think that that is a system we should move to. And then we have an incredibly biased and complicit media that feeds into this. So all three of those things have really put us in a position where we feel like we're at war with our neighbors when we watch TV and when we take in social media. But then when we get out into the real world, that doesn't feel like the case. That's not what we're living in. That's not my day-to-day experience. And I think a lot of Americans feel the same way, and they're watching what's happening on TV, and then they're looking at what their day-to-day lives are, and there's this disconnect between what is America for real versus what I'm being told America is. So for me, the two-party political system we're currently living in is probably most responsible for how we ended up in this situation. And the bottom line is neither political party is solution-based. Both of these parties are blame-based. They want to blame the other party. They want to blame the other people. They want you blaming other people. They want you angry at your neighbors, and they want to chop us up into these tiny little subcategories of race and ethnicity. And we constantly hear about diversity, where most Americans, I genuinely believe, just want to go about their day-to-day lives and let others live their lives in the way that they see fit. That's why I'm a libertarian. That's why I'm going to vote for Joe Jorgensen. The bottom line is, as a libertarian, my fundamental belief, my core principle is live and let live. It's not my job to control your day-to-day life. I'm never going to use identity politics or label you based on your gender or your sexual orientation or your race. Those things are irrelevant to me. So how did we get here? Is we have this divisive political system where rich people are bad, or immigrants are bad, or cops are bad. And we're just trying to chop people up into these little groups, and we're constantly fighting. And the political parties use this to their advantage, because if we're angry at each other and we're blaming somebody else for our problems or for other issues in the world, we feel like we have to turn to these political parties in order to solve these problems. And we get locked into, we can't let the other person win because that person is so terrible that the world will absolutely end. We heard it with Donald Trump. You thought the election of Donald Trump was going to be the end of the world. And if you really are honest and you really look at it, the fact of the matter is the government is functioning pretty much the same way it has for decades. And it's functioning the same way it did under Obama. It's functioning the same way it did under George W. Bush. And as divisive as the political system is, and as adamant they are that the other guy is so terrible that we can't possibly let him win, the bottom line is, if you look back, this is all just to manipulate you into voting for them, because the bottom line is they govern pretty much the same way. That's just the way it is. And the problem with this hyper-partisan environment is that, I'm a Republican, and if I'm talking then to a Democrat, that Democrat can't listen to anything I have to say. He's done. I voted for Donald Trump. Everything I say now is invalid. I can't possibly make a good point. I'm a Democrat. I voted for Hillary. I'm going to vote for Joe Biden. I can't possibly listen to you. One of the great things about being a libertarian is that we don't have that built-in anger and hatred towards us, so people actually can listen. And it's amazing how often I get a Democrat or a Republican to agree with several points I'm making just because, he's a libertarian, so I can actually listen to him. And so that's great, but at the end of the day, this left-right, red-blue battle that we've been fighting has made us absolutely incapable of communicating with each other. It's a major, major reason that we're in the position that we're in right now. So that brings me into my second point. And my second point is the generally uneducated American. And I don't mean to sit here from a position of arrogance, but when I talk to people and I ask questions, we've all seen the videos of these powerfully loyal Democrats and Republicans being asked questions and not being able to answer basic questions about U.S. history, about economics. If we had a stronger and better understanding of that as a population, we could take in what these politicians are telling us and then look from a historical perspective and say, that's not accurate. What you're saying isn't true. Or from an economic perspective and say, that's not how these things work. The fact that we are not knowledgeable in these areas allows us to be manipulated. And that's a real problem because we have to start making better choices. We end up with a Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, Joe Biden type choice because we have not educated ourselves enough to really challenge the nominees that they're putting out there. When you look at a huge Bernie Sanders movement, this guy's a socialist. History and economics will tell you that that's a terrible idea. Centrally planned economies don't function well. And there's a huge groundswell of support for a Bernie Sanders type economic plan, and that's just an example of poor education. So we really have to do a better job educating our kids, educating ourselves, getting away from the media that we're being fed and learning these things on our own. We really have to start doing a better job with that so that we can sniff out these false candidates who are making promises that we know they can't possibly keep. And the third thing here is the incredibly biased and complicit media. This includes social media. We have to understand how all this works and how we got to this place where it seems like we're just being fed a steady diet of fear and anger. Social media works through outrage, essentially. This is why Twitter is terrible. It's just a terrible thing. It works through outrage. I'm on TikTok, and I could put out a very reasoned argument, a quick 15-second video that's rational, that's reasonable, real quick little message, and that will get very few. It won't be one of my top performing. I know when I put a video out, that's not going to be one of my top performing videos. I know that. Then I could put out something that's really controversial. I can go after Black Lives Matter and say something negative about them, or I can attack a political candidate. And if I say something controversial, those videos explode. And social media rewards you with clicks, likes, shares. If the algorithm in these social media apps determines that people are liking and taking in that content, then you're absolutely going to get pushed out more. Your content's going to get pushed out more. And the big media, your mainstream media has picked up on that as well. So the point is to create more and more controversial, more and more divisive articles and stories so that they get clicked, they get liked, they get shared. What happens then is that it feeds back into itself and it says, okay, this is the kind of stuff you like, so I'm going to feed you more of it. And we get sucked into this echo chamber of ever more divisive, ever more fear-mongering, ever more anger-inducing content, and it just feeds on itself. And the more of that you like, the more of it you get. And eventually you're in this echo chamber where all you're hearing is these incredible and terrible things about the opposition. And that's how you end up with the reaction to the Donald Trump election that you got. He's not this terrible. He's not who they made him out to be. The media made him out to be, the left media in this country made him out to be a monster. And it was going to be a disaster. That's why these people were so devastated when Hillary Clinton lost. And I don't know what's going to happen if he beats Joe Biden, which I personally think he will. I'm really hoping that we look at these two terrible choices and as a country, we finally wake up and start looking at candidates outside the Republican and Democrat parties. I think that the Libertarian nominee, Dr. Joe Jorgensen, I should say, is an incredible candidate. And I hope people take a closer look at her. But the bottom line is you're being fed a steady diet of hate, fear, and anger. And you're seeing that boiling over right now. And shame on big media for that, because they should know better. They should know what they're doing. They're literally tearing the country apart by feeding us constant, and it's hard to break away from that. It's hard to challenge your own belief system. And it's so inundated and so ingrained in our day-to-day lives now, all this hate, all this anger, that it's virtually impossible to turn it off and walk away from it. And when you look at social media, you're getting the same kind of content fed to you. And to unite this country, we really have to start talking to each other again. And all three of these things, the two-party system, the lack of education, and our bias and complicit media really is a trifecta drawing a wedge between the American people, when we should be understanding that we have way, way more in common as a people than we have that separates us. So I wanted to get this video out. Wanted to talk about those three things. I am going to continue to put out regular content now that I am settled in. I'm going to get my setup here a little bit more dialed in, maybe get some stuff behind me, maybe go back to the green screen. I don't know, but it'd been a while since I put out a video, so I wanted to get one done and get it posted. And I've been working on kind of writing this up for a while now, in between the incredibly arduous move that we just made. And hopefully I could continue to ramp up and get more content out. I'm back very active on TikTok after taking a break from that. I'm also hoping to get out more active on Instagram. I am Brian for Liberty everywhere: Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. I am on Twitter, but I'm not very active there because I think it's one of the worst places in the world. So anyway, thank you very much for stopping by. And as always, we will see you next time.